Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Darylyn and today we're gonna take a little walk down memory lane and I'm going to tell you a list of probably not an exhaustive list, but things I wish I'd known when I first started getting into plants. Some little wisdom nuggets that could have saved me some time, some money, some heartache, some heartbreak, all of the above. I think it's just really fun to be able to share wisdom with other people who are interested in the same things as I am. And I genuinely think a lot of this stuff would have helped me so much, saved me so much time, saved me so much trial and error if I had just known. So we're gonna do that today. And yeah, also if you have other things you think would be valuable for other people to know, please feel free to leave them in the comments and maybe we can get a little wisdom chain going and, help out some people and kind of bounce some ideas off of each other. And just, it's always fun to just help your friends level up in their plant game. So I put a little list together for you guys. And I think the first thing, well, I mean, to be honest, this is not in any particular order. So this isn't top tips in order from 10 to 1. But the first thing that I think could have benefited me if I'd just, accepted that it was necessary earlier in my journey is that humidity vessels are so powerful in whether or not you succeed with bringing plants into your collection, especially if they're young plants, especially if they're imported plants, if they're propagations. To be fair, some plants just need humidity vessels. They're not going to be something that you can grow in your house. It kind of depends, too, on the conditions you have. I'm super lucky. My house, generally, I can keep it at 65% humidity without really having to run humidifiers. But, for somebody like me who has decent humidity vessels were still really, really helpful for me. I actually made a video, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago about all the different kinds of humidity vessels and the different ways you can use them. I've used cabinets, grow tent, a little mini greenhouse, literally just plastic bins, whatever, little terrariums, jars, whatever you have, you totally can use it, but it makes such a huge difference with propagating and acclimating and growing young plants. If you are still kind of in that phase of oh, I'm not gonna do humidity vessels, I'm gonna figure out how to do it without, I don't think that you should resist. I think you should just go to Target and buy a clear plastic bin and experiment with it because it honestly is so game changing. And it's honestly not as hard to acclimate plants from super high humidity to a little bit more reasonable conditions as maybe you'd think. So I highly recommend it. It's definitely helped me save a number of plants that would just be dead if it wasn't for that. And also, there's plants that I have that absolutely 100% just would not survive outside of the humidity vessels. I have a couple of fancy anthuriums that if I had been stubborn and tried to grow them outside of a cabinet, I would just have wasted my money because they wouldn't have made it. So highly recommend. Please, 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 if you're resistant to the idea, just get a plastic bin and mess with that. It will change your life, I promise. So the next thing is the power of water quality. This is something that if you're gonna try and get into anything beyond big box store plants, you really are gonna have to address water quality. Unfortunately, our tap water for the most part, I mean, depending on where you live, but I'm kind of generalizing to, the United States for the most part where I live, our water quality isn't ideal for a lot of these plants. There's things in tap water like chlorine, fluoride, other minerals. I mean, even sometimes buildup from your pipes, your plants can be sensitive to. The absolute best piece of advice that I got from Ivan at Equigenera when I interviewed him a couple of years ago, I asked him, how are all of your anthurium leaves so perfect? And he said, oh, it's the water quality. We water with the rainwater in Ecuador. It's the perfect pH. It doesn't have any harmful chemicals in it. It's got all the right, minerals and everything. And it's water quality. And so I asked him what could I do to improve my water quality? And he was like, well, at the very least, definitely filter your water. And then you need to pH balance it. And yeah, plants like, for the most part, especially aroids, other plants may prefer pH that's a little bit different, but for aroids, you know, 5.5 to 6.5 is a good range. And that is actually slightly acidic. So like water, distilled water should be a perfectly neutral pH, and it should be 7. So your tap water is not going to be a perfect 7 because it's probably got stuff in it, but your aroids are gonna like their water a little bit more acidic than that. So you need to, once you add everything to it, you need to pH it to be like 5.7 for my anthurium is about like the sweet spot for me personally. So I worked really, really hard to only give my plants good water that's been properly adjusted to what they need. And, you know, I worked really hard on my nutrient potion. You know, I don't skip pH balancing. And I think that it's like, honestly, the results speak for themselves. So if you are someone who's struggling with things about your plants, you just like can't get them to size up, you can't figure out why you get so many fungal and bacterial spots, you can't figure out like why your plants just aren't thriving, I would definitely highly recommend, if you're not already, working on your water quality. And that will be trial and error. Like I can tell you exactly what I do, but it might not work for you. So it's gonna be some trial and error. It might be a little bit of sciencey, a little bit more sciencey than maybe you initially feel comfortable with, but it's worth it. Like, especially if you're gonna drop a lot of money on fancy plants, you cannot just give them tap water and be like, oh yeah, you know, everything's gonna work out. You need to be prepared to go the extra mile and do everything you can for them. Otherwise, do not spend your money on expensive fancy stuff. So water quality, huge. The next thing is that when you see leaf issues that you can't figure out what the cause is, like it's not pests, you don't see pest issues, and you're like pretty sure nothing's changed, and like you can't figure out what the problem is. Leaf issues almost always indicate root issues. So that can be a water quality issue. That can be an issue with your substrate being too heavy. That can be an issue caused by inconsistent watering, meaning that you are letting your plant dry out way too much, and then you're watering it too much, and like the roots are dying and then rotting. But like 9 times out of 10 it's a root issue, and it's usually that they're rotting. So when you see that something's funky going on with your plant's leaves, especially anthurium, check the roots. Check the roots. That is 9 times out of 10 gonna be where you're gonna find your problem. And a lot of times the problem can be solved for future leaves, because once your leaves are messed up, you can't fix them. For future leaves is, you know, like a chunkier mix, or the quality of your water. So, you know, pH balancing, making sure you're not giving them too much fertilizer. Also making sure that you repot your plants when they need to be repotted, because what happens when you leave a plant pot bound for too long, especially if your plant is in semi-hydro, is that eventually the roots will like choke themselves out and they'll suffocate, and then they'll die, and then they'll rot. So like if you see your plant starting to have like yellowing leaves for no reason, or if there's too much water being taken up in the leaves, or you're getting bacterial spots, fungal spots, check the roots. Always start with checking the roots, and you may be able to fix the problem just by adjusting the heaviness of your substrate, or moving the plant from plastic to terracotta, or vice versa. It took me longer than it should have to figure this out. So that would be a big helpful tip that I will give to you, is leaf issues are probably root issues. Check the roots. Oh my God, this is something that I feel like everyone struggles with, and that is finding an effective pest control regimen, like products that actually work. I really don't understand why there are not better resources about which pest control products work for which pests available really online. It's honestly, anytime anyone asks or brings this up, it's always a million freaking opinions about a million things. And like neem oil doesn't really work that well for most things, because an actual neem oil product has had the active ingredient that actually kills bugs diluted so much to the point where it's no longer effective. The active ingredient in neem oil, I think it's called like a dirazitratan or something like that. I'll put it on the screen. It is not very effective as a topical treatment. They did a study and they tested a whole bunch of different things. The active ingredient in neem oil at a concentrated level was the most effective, but topically, meaning you spray it on your plant, it's only 65% effective against thrips. That is not good enough. That's not good enough. What I found after a long time of searching is, for me, so far, for every pest I've faced, which includes mostly thrips, spider mites, primarily, what works is topical treatment with a product with the active ingredient spinosad. In my case, I like to use the Bonide insecticidal super soap. It's like Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew on steroids. It's great, and they carry it at most garden centers. So Bonide insecticidal super soap, topical treatment, and then do a soil drench with a product called Azamax that is the systemic, that has the neem concentrate active ingredient aziriditran or whatever it's called, at levels where like the bugs that are still left, if they eat the plant, they will be poisoned and then they will die. And Azamax works so quickly. I've treated my plants, I've like added it to their reservoirs when I knew that there were thrips in my house, and then the next day I've looked and found like shriveled, yellowed, disgusting, ugly larvae that are being poisoned by this product. So these things work. So if you're having a problem with spider mites and thrips, Azamax will take care of both. That works. It took me forever to figure this out, to get like the tea on something that really did work. If you live in Canada, I believe you can get Azamax shipped to Canada. I know it's tough up there. They have a lot stricter rules about like what kind of pesticides you can use, but those products work. So if you're looking for something that will actually get the job done and you just want to have it on hand in case, go, buy the Bonide insecticidal super soap from whatever garden center you prefer. Keep that on hand and then order Azamax and keep that on hand. I just use 1 tablespoon per gallon and you're good to go for a soil drench. And if you would like a more extended video on that, I can probably do that at some point, but I wish I had known that. Oh, horrible experience figuring that out on my own, so you're welcome. Another thing, I really wish that I had known when I was getting into climbing plants that moss poles actually are really difficult to keep moist, and that you have to enclose the back of the moss pole with something that is going to prevent moisture from escaping, or your moss pole is going to dry out so fast and become so hydrophobic. You're gonna have to either water it, like drench it almost every day, or it's just never gonna be wet and your plant's not actually gonna be able to use the moss pole, and the moss pole is just gonna be a fancy stake holding your plant up. There's lots of products now that are actually like plastic, where like the moss pole is actually made from plastic and you can like fasten it into the pole and you can stack them as the plant grows, and the back is like solid plastic so that it helps keep the moisture in. But back in the day, before these products like were kind of on the market, like we used to have to like make our moss poles. Oh my God, I sound like a plant grandma. I mean, people still do it this way, and I still do it this way because I have all the materials, but I would make my moss poles out of like the gardening mesh, the plastic gardening mesh that you get at like Home Depot. And I would, like fasten that into a pole, fill it with moss, and then I would actually have to get like a piece of plastic and like put it onto the back of the pole. And I have a few plants like that still. I recently bought some of the newfangled fancy ones that I don't have to do it myself anymore. But if you're trying to keep your climbing plants outside of greenhouse conditions, 65% humidity in my house is like pretty good for most people. My moss poles dry out in a day without the plastic backing. So I wish I'd known that that was like really needed. It would have saved me a lot of just annoying issues. So you're welcome. If you're new to moss poles, make sure that you're covering the back with something to help the moisture not escape, because otherwise like you will never be able to get your plant to root into that moss pole. All right, so Aroid mixes. I really wish that I had known or been given like a recipe that actually works. They're always way too heavy for Aroids, for Aroids that like really like you want them to go. They're always way too heavy. The conventional wisdom when I started keeping Aroids was like 1/3 potting mix, 1/3 perlite, and 1/3 orchid bark. That is way too heavy for most aroids. The mix that I have found that has grown my aroids the best, mostly philodendrons and some monsteras, is like almost entirely orchid bark. You want it to mimic like leaf litter or like, you know, the forest floor more so than, you know, dirt that you would find like on a prairie or something in the Midwest. Like the rainforest does not have like topsoil the same way that like we do in North America. It's a different kind of thing. So for me, I do like 60% orchid bark. I do like a sprinkle of horticultural charcoal. I do a handful of tree fern. I do the chunkiest perlite possible, maybe like 20% chunkiest perlite possible. I'm talking about chunks that are like, you know, big. And you have to rinse it. You have to rinse the perlite dust off, and then a sprinkle of worm castings for fertilizer. And then you guys are gonna be shocked, but sphagnum moss, like rip it up into like the smallest possible pieces that you can, and like distribute it evenly as much as possible through the soil. And so it helps maintain a lot of moisture, but there's still a lot of air pockets in that mix. Because aroids, for the most part, I've found, like, they don't really like to be waterlogged. They don't love having wet feet, but what they really love is to have water like run over their roots and then to just be in like a lot of humidity. And so, you know, the really chunky mix with all the different little kind of bits and bobs in there just helps like keep a lot of like airiness, but a lot of humidity. And I find that this mix is really great. The philodendrons love it, but also I don't have to water them like every couple of days. So highly recommend. I had another video about like aroid mixes like from 2 years ago. I probably should take that video down because like it's like mostly the same, but I like tweaked it a little. So I can make another like long video about this too, but I really wish that that recipe had been floating around because I die by it now. It's so good. Okay, so another thing too, speaking of philodendrons, is that like I wish that I had known just how overhyped philodendrons are. For the most part, most philodendrons are not the best growers in ambient household conditions in North America where I live. A lot of them are extremely difficult to size up. They just are not suited to being houseplants. And they also like, there's so many of them that just look the same. There's honestly very few philodendrons that I feel like are cool enough and interesting enough and solid enough growers that if I had to start my collection over, that I would like buy again. There's just not that many. I honestly wish that I just like hadn't bought so many dang philodendrons, but you know, like now I know that I'm like moving on from them. I'm probably not gonna buy any more in the foreseeable future. I have no philodendrons on my wish list at this point. Yeah, even Ilsamanii, like I found out recently that their variegation comes in yellow and I'm like, canceled. Not for me. Yeah, they're just really overhyped. A lot of them are just not good growers. And so for me personally, I wish I'd known that. I would have saved myself a lot of trouble because yeah, a lot of them get like real bad issues with spider mites. Thrips just absolutely like chew through them. They're so tough to grow in ambient humidity, but there are some that are really great that I do love that I would buy again. But for the most part, most of them, no. Something else too that like, I didn't learn until I was years into my current plant journey is how fast like plant chores pile up and how like exponential that can feel when you have a lot of plants, especially if you get a lot of your plants around the same time and they all are like maturing at the same time. The plant chores can get so overwhelming to the point where like I've had multiple summers where all I did with my free time was plant chores. Just be aware that like, you know, if you are getting into planting and you have 50 plants and they're all small and you kind of got them all like this year, you're gonna have to make some decisions in the next couple of years about which ones you want to keep and which ones you don't want, because you will not be able to physically care for 50 plants at the same time. All need to be repotted at the same time and all need moss pulls at the same time, and like it's so much work. I really cannot overstate how much it's going to pay off in the future of pacing yourself. Pace yourself, because not only is it like a huge amount of plant chores when everything needs to be up potted at the same time and everything needs tons of attention at the same time, and like, oh no, like 5 of my plants are having a meltdown, I need to unpot them, I need to like propagate them, I need to do all these things. You will have like plant emergencies that you have to spend like $100 to $200 to get yourself out of, or your plants will die. Like if you get thrips and you don't have stuff handy to take care of it, depending on how large your collection is, like it could be $100 or $200 to get everything treated and to get rid of the thrips. And like if you don't treat thrips, eventually they will kill your plant. Spider mites, man, like it definitely takes a lot longer, but spider mites will kill your plants too eventually if you don't treat the plants. There's things like root mealies. Oh, root mealies are that would be a horrendous nightmare to get root mealies, because like at least with thrips, you don't have to get rid of all of your substrate, because you can do the Azomax soil drench and it kills everything in the soil. And then like the plants actually like get the protection in their leaves. So they, the bugs, if they try to eat the plants, they die. That's a big myth that you actually have to get rid of your substrate if you have thrips. Like you don't need to do that. You just need to do a soil drench with a systemic. Root mealies, boy, do you have to get rid of your substrate. Those things are nasty. Like they will rip through a collection. Like honestly, if I found like root mealies, I don't have that many plants that like would be super affected by them, but I would probably be taking cuttings and like throwing my plants away. They're that bad. It would cost so much money to replace all of the substrate, and like I would have to like be sterilizing all my pots. That would be an absolute nightmare. Pest issues can cost a lot of money to fix. If you have a plant that like gets dropped, or its pot gets broken, or it gets root rot and it's like melting down and you have to go out and get a new pot, or like I don't know. I've had like a number of like situations come up where like I knew if I didn't do something for the plant, or if I waited too long, it was gonna be a risk of losing the plant. Especially if you're in semi-hydro. Like if you have plants in semi-hydro and then like all of a sudden you have to repot the plant, like you could be shelling out a lot of money, because some of those semi-hydro pots, man, like they're over $100, and you always need a bigger semi-hydro pot than you think you're going to need. Like that is something that I've learned. They're so expensive. Unfortunately, like the Lechuzapon prices have come down a lot, but it's still $20 for a bag if it's in stock. Like if it's not in stock, you're gonna pay a lot more. And yeah, DIY pon's not cheaper than Lechuzapon. Leca is a lot less expensive, but like what if you run out of like your nutrient components and you've had an expensive month and like you have to wait till you get paid to get it? Like it's so easy to run up into situations where you have a plant emergency, you have to shell out like $100, $200 to save your plant. Once you get like 50 plants, that adds up a lot. So pace yourself, please pace yourself. Trust me, it gets to the point where it's not sustainable and you're gonna have to start getting rid of your plants, and you actually run the risk of ruining your love for plants if you go like too hard too fast. So pace yourself, please, for the love of God. I guess that kind of like goes along with like another thing I had listed on here, that like plants are just not a cheap hobby. Like even if you have cheap plants, you get to the point where you have enough of them, they're not cheap anymore, because cheap plants require the same pest control and substrates and pots and all that stuff that expensive plants do. So just make sure that if you're the kind of plant person who's on a budget and who's financially responsible, that buying a lot of plants is eventually going to lead you to lots of costs down the road, and you may not have control over when you have to spend that money. But yeah, I guess the last thing on this list, and this is not like really a grand finale, but I think it's something that's interesting and it's something I wish I'd kind of known more about, is that like caring for small plants is so different from caring for large plants. It's just so much more work. Like repotting, a small or medium-sized plant is just like a quick little thing. Like if you're repotting a large plant, I mean, that's like a whole workout. It's so funny to me, like you repot a plant, like a medium plant going into a large plant, and then now all of a sudden it's got a new pot and you're like, it doesn't fit in the spot where it used to be. Where am I gonna put it? And like, oh, the only place where it fits doesn't get the same light. And like, oh, it's so big, and like, how am I gonna flush it? And like, how am I gonna take it outside to water it? Like, how am I gonna fit it in my shower? It's like, there's so much that goes into it. It's like a whole workout. I don't know. Like, I just like didn't expect it to be so different and so hard. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I really like my plants, and I've gotten rid of some that I didn't find it worth it to be, taken care of. But yeah, big plants, it is like the space thing is tough, and like maintaining them, it's a whole workout. Like it's a whole afternoon. Like repotting a freaking big plant, it's like once you get into, you know, like 12-inch pots and above, it's like a whole workout. Like sometimes you can't even do it alone. You have to like beg your partner or your roommate or your friend to help you. So I don't know. I hope that that was like useful information. Let me know in the comments if you have questions, or like if you have other tips. Let's, you know, try and share the wisdom. But that's gonna be it from me for today. But I'll see you soon. Bye.